Posterior pituitary antidiuretic hormone, also known as ADH, by
Grace Wegman,
Endocrinology.
and Vanessa Mussey. Water is one of the most important components in our body. In fact, it makes up 70% of our body. It protects organs, carries nutrients and oxygen, lubricates joints, and removes waste. ADH is such an amazing hormone because it helps retain water in our bodies. It does this by decreasing the amount of water lost by our kidneys. Because of this, we can do things like play sports, do art, learn, and much more. So what exactly is antidiuretic hormone, also known as ADH? Antidiuretic hormone is commonly known as ADH or vasopressin. It is produced by the posterior pituitary gland, which is located in the brain. Despite wide variation in the amount of water you may take in each day, body water content must remain incredibly stable. Precision and control of the levels of the body's water and solute concentrations are controlled by ADH. So as you can see, ADH is very important in your body.
So what does the posterior pituitary gland look like? What is the structure of ADH? So here's a gigantic brain examination. First, we're going to look at the hypothalamus, which then is going to give rise to the pituitary gland. For this particular case, ADH starts in the hypothalamus, as you can see up here, from the neurosecretory cells. From there, it gets basically pushed down through the hypothalamus into the infundibulum, which is the piece that connects hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. That is going to then go into the posterior pituitary, as you can see here, which is our main focus. The anterior pituitary is right next to it, but for this piece, like I said, ADH comes from the posterior pituitary. As far as the structure goes, ADH is a 9-amino acid peptide. It is typically synthesized as a prohormone in neurons in the hypothalamus. Specific to that, within hypothalamic neurons in a hormone, in this case ADH, it's packaged in secretory vesicles within a particular carrier protein, which is called a neurophysin. That neurophysin, along with ADH, is then released upon the hormone secretion. So function, what does ADH do? This particular function of ADH plays a very significant role in kidney function. So specific to kidneys, it causes further reabsorption of water. To go more into detail, ADH typically binds to receptors on cells in the collecting ducts of the kidney, and that promotes reabsorption of the water back into circulation via the kidney to be used throughout the body. For this particular thing, if ADH was absent, the collecting ducts that are relatively impermeable in the kidney to water wouldn't work because they're impermissible, or they're impermeable, excuse me. So urine would just be free flowing and ultimately being lost by the body, which would cause you to dehydrate, which is again why ADH is so important. ADH also regulates your blood pressure, creates an osmotic balance in the body, and works to create sodium homeostasis. And here is just a summary of the function of ADH.
So the main factor that controls how much water the kidney excretes is ADH. Now let's talk about how it works. So the part of the kidney that ADH acts on is here. It's the collecting duct. So let's zoom in on a little piece of the collecting duct. So here's a zoomed in version of the collecting duct. And what ADH does is it comes over, and we'll draw it as these little circles, and it binds to receptors on the principal cells in the collecting duct. So not the intercalated cells, but the principal cells. And what happens when it binds to these receptors is that it causes the cell to put aquaporins into its apical membrane. So these are aquaporins. If you recall, aquaporins are channels that allow water to pass freely. And so these aquaporins allow water from this fluid, which is basically urine at this point, they allow water to pass through and therefore get reabsorbed. So water molecules pass that way. And now hopefully this leaves you with a lot of questions. If I stop the video now, you should be really unsatisfied. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is, okay, so you put aquaporins in the apical membrane, but how is water getting through the basolateral membrane? Well, it turns out that the basolateral membrane actually always has little aquaporins in it, so that it's really easy for water to pass through that side. So that's one complaint you might have. The next complaint you might have is that when we talked about fluid shifts, we said that water shifts in and out of cells through aquaporins. So that made it seem like cells always have aquaporins and water can always get into them. And that's true to an extent, but the number of aquaporins is limited so that can't actually happen so fast. So when we add more aquaporins into the membrane, it allows a lot more water to get through and faster so that you can reabsorb more. So that might be complaint number 2. And now complaint number 3 you should have, probably the biggest complaint you should have is, we spent so much time talking about in the proximal convoluted tubule and the loop of Henle and so on. We spent so much time talking about what drives the reabsorption of sodium and water and so on. We talked about all those osmotic forces that cause that to happen. So what is the force driving water to cross here? The aquaporins allow water to pass through, but what causes water to go this way? And the answer to that is that actually out here, we have an extremely high concentration of solutes. So what is out here? Well, out here is interstitium, right? We're not inside cells and we're not inside the blood, so it's interstitium. And we're actually in the part of the kidney that we call the medulla. And so I'm drawing this dotted line to show the separation between the cortex and the medulla. And so the high concentration is here in the medulla. So it's in the medullary, meaning in the medulla, the medullary interstitium. That's where we have our high concentration. And because we have a very high concentration out here, the driving force for water to be absorbed is our usual driving force, which is osmotic. Now this just brings up more questions like, how do we have a high concentration of solutes here in the medulla? And that'll be the subject of upcoming videos. But for now, just understand that the driving force for water reabsorption is this high concentration, and the high concentration is always here, but it's only when you have ADH, which comes along and which puts aquaporins here in the apical membrane, it's only then that you're actually using this high concentration to drive reabsorption of water. If you don't have ADH, you don't have the aquaporins, and therefore you can't make use of that osmotic difference.
Okay, so next is diseases. What diseases are involved? So there are 3 pathological states related to ADH. So the first is the syndrome of inappropriate ADH and occurs when ADH is released in excessive unregulated quantities. And the remaining 2 pathological states related to ADH results from either decreased ADH or resistance to its effects. So next is the syndrome of inappropriate ADH, results in excess water reabsorption. SIADH arise include lung cancer and central nerve system disturbances. So lower levels of sodium are associated with headache, seizure, and even respiratory arrest. These symptoms arise due to the increases movement of water into neurons. And next is the central diabetes insipidus, which is the most common form and often seen after brain trauma or surgeries that damage either the hypothalamus or posterior pituitary. So treatments, are there any treatments to those diseases? So the treatment of the SIADH is, it cannot be cured, but can be treated in 3 ways. The first is fluid and water restriction, which is the most common way. And the next is medications to reduce fluid retentions and medications that inhibit ADH. Okay, next is the treatment of CDI. Acute onset of CDI usually occurs in the neurosurgery settings. During the states, the water deficient would be replaced with hypotonic fluid. For chronic DI, human-made hormone desmopressin can control the thirsty, and the polyuria of CDI can allow the patient a normal quality life. So desmopressin is analog to ADH, first used in 1993. It's important to maintain normal plasma sodium concentrations.
Thank you.
Thank you.